And welcome to the next webinar in the series at Forums International. My name is Laurie Beagle. I'm the Managing Director, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome the Company Watch, one of our corporate partners, to talk about the rise of alternative data in credit with Dr. Adam Tucker and Dr. Philip Derry. Just to let you know that there is a chat button at the bottom of your screen. So if you've got any questions, please post them there, and we'll get to them probably at the end of the Company Watch presentation. This presentation is being recorded, so it will be available on our website and probably the Company Watch website in a couple of days' time. So we look forward to a good webinar, and let's get started. So for those of you who don't know Forums International, I'd like to give you a bit of background. We started in 2015. However, we have been running slides, I'd like to see the slides, but running forums since 1991. Our oldest forum is 28 years this year, 28 years old, and I think we've just had the 158th meeting. Our objectives are very much to provide credit professionals with the opportunity to meet and discuss key trading challenges, share experiences, and create new and best practices. And most importantly is how to discuss how to succeed in the future. There's a lot of challenges coming up over the next year, I'm sure. Attendances for credit and finance professionals of all levels, and we only allow pre-approved corporate partners to attend and present, so you'll never intentionally be sold to at any of our meetings. We have a portfolio currently of 10 forums. I won't go through them all, but the Credit Professionals Forum is the one which started in 1991. We're kicking off on the 16th of May a new forum called the Fraud Prevention Network with Graydon and DLA Piper and the CICM and the City of London Police. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. Through to user groups like the SAP user group for frustrated SAP users. Now, we're very proud of our corporate partners. I think there's 20 or 21 on this list. Forums International became a corporate partner of the CICM in January this year, and we'd like to publicly thank all of our other partners for all of their support so far and hopefully ongoing. So why are we different? The agenda items that we go through at our meetings are not decided by us, they're decided by the members. They're not lecture-based, but interactive workshops and discussions. Now, we work on the premise that our sessions are on a 50-50 basis, where 50% is led by the subject matter expert, and the other 50% is where the attendees share their experiences. Now, you put those two together, it's very, very powerful. Our forums provide opportunities for attendees to discuss key trading issues in their current industry sectors, and to share experiences and challenges and discuss how they have secured success. So it's not always negative, there's always the positive there as well. Now, our objectives are many, so but just to go through these: network with their peers, which is important, of course, you're learning from each other, gain tools and techniques, increase and enhance personal skill levels, gather information intelligence, which hopefully will help you avoid fraud and bad debt, develop those new and best practices, as I mentioned before, and improve a team's productivity and results. So all of these things at the forums are ones that you can take back to the workplace. So meetings are pre-planned and scheduled a year in advance. We understand that taking a day out of the office requires a lot of investment, So we want to make sure that we are delivering on that investment. We have LinkedIn and Facebook groups in place, so to keep you advised all the time. We have a website with a secure members area. This houses all past presentations and workshops, and gives you an opportunity also to talk to the other members through our knowledge hub, which is 24/7. You also earn CPD points or hours when you attend our forums for those CICM members. And we are supported by pre-approved and contracted major corporate partners. And you will have access to the industry's subject matter experts, of which two we've got on the webinar today. Our forums are affordable, their annual membership fees, and dare I say, cheaper than training. And it covers 2 attendees at each meeting. Now, we've covered dozens, probably hundreds of subjects since we started, but it just gives you a little bit of a flavour here of some of the things that we've covered recently, from automation to commercial risk, global cash, cryptocurrencies, fraud, GDPR, outsourcing, query management, and of course the missing one that's not on that list is Brexit. So 2019 has started off at a pace, and we have a very exciting year coming up. We're running almost 40 meetings a year. We already had a credit card one-day forum in March, which was a great success. We have our ICT forum, which is for IT, communications and electronics. Now we're expanding that forum this year, so we will actually be also running that across Europe. Our pharmaceutical forum, which has been running for a few years, has been mainly focused on wholesalers, but we're actually extending that to include manufacturers, and again that will be across Europe. We ran a very, very successful Amazon Suppliers Day last year, and we're going to be doing that again in September this year with the CICM. We'll also be running roundtables, some workshops and webinars with the CICM this year, so I think there's something like 9 items coming up, so watch this space. And a great innovation that we've added this year for those of you that can't leave your desk. So a bit like a webinar, we are now offering virtual attendance. So you actually be able to dial into the meeting, hear what's going on, see the slides, but instead of hitting that chat box at the bottom, we will be able to hear you as well. So you'll be able to take part in the meetings. We hope that we'll actually see you on occasions, but when you can't get time to when you can't travel, then the virtual access is there. We very much understand that in a world where everybody is time poor, getting away from that office, the office is very much seen as a luxury. But we hope that you will. Our forums are not just meetings, they're communities. As we said, we have meetings for 3 or 4 times a year for each group, but you can also communicate on that 24/7 basis. We're providing a vehicle for you to learn new skills, address business challenges, develop new and best practices, and share experiences with your peers. The forums are subscription based, but attending your first meeting is free. So please come along, have a look, meet the members, gauge for yourself whether in fact it is for you before you make any commitment to join. So I'd now like to hand over to Company Watch. I think it was going to be Adam first. I'm not sure whether it's going to be Adam.
Yeah, it's me.
It is, okay. So I'd like to hand over to Dr. Adam Tucker, who can take you through the rise of alternative data in credit risk. Over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Laurie. Yeah, so as Laurie says, we're here to talk about the rise of alternative data in credit risk. Okay, but just to summarize the structure of what we're going to talk about first. Okay, so initially we're just going to go through kind of traditional credit scoring, financial ratios, what people do with kind of current, more traditional financial data. And then we'll move on to the alternative data. So asking questions like, what is alternative data and why are people using it now? And when we go into that, we'll briefly touch upon things that are happening with technology, like people having more access to compute and data storage now, and also a bit about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then we'll talk about what the different types of alternative data are that are available for using in corporate credit risk models. And then finally, we'll go through a couple of applications that we've been working on using alternative data at Company Watch. So to start off, so credit risk models for companies have had their roots in ratio analysis, basically as long as financial statements have been available. So Benjamin Graham first published this book in 1949, where he looked at the current ratio and the ratio of debt to current assets to evaluate companies' health. That was mainly to do with picking undervalued stocks in the investment market, but also applies to companies' health with credit. So what are the ratios that people kind of look at generally? There's profitability ratios. Normally, these are one of the biggest indicators of financial strength, given that half of US publicly listed companies are loss-making. There's liquidity ratios, so things like I mentioned before, the current ratio and the acid test ratio, things that could cause a cash flow crisis in the short term. And then there's things like creditor days and debtor days, so how quickly does a company pay the people it owes money to, or how quickly does it get paid? And then things like return on equity, so how efficient is a company at converting its equity to profits? So that's financial ratios. How are these things combined? Well, in 1967, a guy called Ed Altman came up with what's known as the Z-score. And this was using a statistical learning technique called linear discriminant analysis to put together the financial ratios. And this is when people really started looking at, could they look at the pattern recognition of companies that have previously failed and work out what the features of those were in comparison to companies that hadn't failed. And he had a very simple and easily interpretable formula based on 5 financial ratios. And originally he was looking at a sample of around 66 industrial companies. So very small kind of sample in comparison to what people talk about with data these days. People still use the Z-score as a kind of yardstick measure, and it's available on things like Bloomberg today. Okay, so that brings us on to Company Watch's kind of measurement of financial strength coming from kind of traditional financial accounts. We have something called the H-score, which is a bit like the Z-score. It still uses discriminant analysis. But instead of using kind of the bare financial ratios that I touched upon in the first slide, it transforms the data, and we actually build a suite of models looking at different types of companies based on their balance sheet. So maybe a services company would have a lot different looking balance sheet to maybe a retail company. They might have much more inventory on their balance sheet. So we would deal with those kind of companies differently. And we put all of those together into one kind of composite model, and we output a score between 0 and 100. And the score is meant to represent the quantile function of the population. So that means if you have a score of 0, then essentially all companies in your sector and in your domain are stronger than you financially based on this measurement. And if you have a score of 100, then you're the strongest company. Okay, so that's just kind of a very quick overview of what people do kind of historically in financial credit risk models. But now we're just going to talk a bit about alternative data and alternative methods. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Bill, now.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about alternative data. So Adam's given a very good introduction to the sorts of financial analysis that traditionally underpin credit risk. And now I'm going to dive into some of the newer forms of alternative data that we're using. So first up, I guess we have to define what we mean by alternative data. Traditional data of the sort that Adam's been referencing is really typically numerical data. It's structured, and it typically is in the form of the company's financial accounts, or possibly the stock prices. Very structured and numerical data. Alternative data, which is actually a label borrowed from the quantitative investment funds, is really a fairly broad term for any sort of data that doesn't fit into that description. So often this is unstructured. It may have very varying sources and may be produced over very varying timescales, and it's also often not produced by the company themselves. So this might be sentiment data from competitors or peers, and we'll come on to some more details of that shortly. So why are we talking about alternative data now? Well, as we all know, we're in a kind of data revolution at the moment. Everyone's talking about big data and data growing at an almost exponential rate. So over the past 2 years, more data, more information has been produced than in all history up to this point. The variety of data we're trapping and recording is also growing. And hand in hand with this, we have now more scalable computational power and the ability to actually store this data. If you compare what modern data capture and processing techniques are to where they were 10 or 15 years ago, or even 5 years ago, you'll see that this has moved on at such a rapid rate that now we really have the ability to look at, store, and analyze data in such large volumes in comparison. And hand in hand with this, we've had advances in the actual techniques that we use to process and look at this data. And this is deep learning, artificial intelligence, machine learning, a variety of techniques that people use to really try and gain insight from this huge volume of data. So just to put in perspective what we mean by big data, here's a few kind of data points about the volumes of data being produced every minute in 2017. So you can really begin to appreciate that if there are 450,000 tweets sent a minute, if there are 70,000 Netflix videos watched a minute, in order to process this data, capture this data, and record this data, we need all these new technologies. But these offer an absolute goldmine of information in their domains if we are able to really harness them. So I'll hand back over to Adam to talk a bit about AI, which is really the technique driving a lot of this new insight. Adam appears not to be available, so I'll carry on. So yes, so as I said, artificial intelligence is really the kind of engine that's driving a lot of this this new innovation. A lot of this boils down to pattern recognition. So the basic goal of artificial intelligence and machine learning is to spot patterns in data at a scale that we really aren't able to do as humans.
Sorry, I'm here now.
You're back. Okay, I'll hand back over to Adam.
Okay, so one of the main reasons that alternative data has started to be used today, as Phil says, is kind of the proliferation of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So AI is essentially just really good at pattern recognition. Here is an example. So basically, this is an example of the pictures of the back of a healthy person's retina and someone who had this particular disease that comes about when people have diabetes. Essentially, if this particular problem can be spotted, it can, before it takes hold, it can stop the person going blind. And out of all the eye specialists that look at this, only 60% of the time could those people pick up this particular problem. Whereas some AI researchers took 150,000 pictures of the back of people's eyes, and that they were able to train an AI algorithm to pick out these very tiny hemorrhages which occur, much better than the consultant eye people ever could. Essentially, AI is really good at pattern matching. Here's an example of where AI doesn't do so well. This is one of Google's picture recognition algorithms, struggled to differentiate between whether a picture showed a sloth or a pain au chocolat. However, the main point is that if you have enough data and you put enough data into your artificial intelligence algorithm, then essentially machines at very specific tasks can be better than humans at these things. General artificial intelligence, which is where a machine can learn to do lots of different things, is probably somewhat further away. But here we're talking about doing very specific pattern recognition. Okay, and also I just thought I'd share a quote from Andrew Ng, who's quite a prominent computer scientist in artificial intelligence. And he's saying here that essentially there's going to be a revolution in the next few years. He's saying that just as electricity transformed almost everything 100 years ago, today he feels that AI is going to do the same thing in many industries and really take hold in the next several years to come. And as I kind of touched upon in the last slide, the reason that this is happening is because whereas with kind of traditional statistical techniques, a bit like the Z-score that we were talking about earlier in the talk, they kind of had a plateau of performance. So the more data you threw at them, their performance would kind of come to a plateau. Whereas with a lot of these artificial intelligence algorithms, like deep learning, the more data you have, and if you can throw hundreds of millions of data points at a particular thing, then it will learn and continue to learn and have greater performance. So it's kind of like a virtuous circle, really. So we collect more data and the accuracy of AI increases and so on, and it goes round and round. So that's kind of generally why AI is coming to prominence. But why and how is it different in credit risk? Well, essentially it isn't. It's still pattern recognition. You have some companies and you have whatever data you want to throw at them, whatever that data may be, and you put that into your model, and the aim of it is for your algorithm to draw some kind of decision boundary, like I'm showing here. So here I'm showing blue dots are meant to represent companies that maybe didn't go on to have some kind of financial distress, and orange dots here are companies that did go on to have some financial distress. And the data, the axes here, the X1, X2, X3, that could be more traditional data, things like sales or the assets of the company or the stocks and shares prices, that kind of thing. Or it could be unstructured data, things like text or pictures that we've been showing here. So essentially, in credit risk, it's not any different to any other domain. You've just got to put in the data, and if you have enough data, you can start to build these models and get good accuracy. Okay, so was just a bit about kind of AI and in general and how it might apply to credit risk, but I'm going to hand back to my colleague to talk to you a bit about what different data types there are available.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so we've now seen really what we mean by alternative data and how we can use modern machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques to really build performant models to capture trends in credit risk. So what do we actually mean by types of data of credit risk? So as we said, this is the traditional data, is the financial data that an accountant would really be focused on. Maybe it's also market data such as share prices and more macroeconomic factors such as the stage in the economic cycle or any country risk indicators. But alternative data might be text data. So this might be from social media, or it could be from filed documents. It can also be network data. So here we're thinking about the interconnections and relationships in possibly even existing data and how we can use that to assess credit risk. We're also in the age of open government and open data. We have more and more government data sets available, whether that be VAT-based information, public contracts that are tendered now have to be publicly released, and business rates information as well. And we're also living in the world of open banking now, and PSD2 and open banking is bringing about huge increase in potentially in the volume of data that credit risk analysts may be able to have access to. It's now possible for credit reference agencies to request that a company give them access to their transactional data for their current account and use that as a basis of credit scoring. And even more kind of new age, we can even look at customer behavior within credit reference platforms, click data, and web hits, these sorts of areas. So there's a huge array of alternative data sources, and these vary in structure, they vary in timescale, and this is just a snapshot. I'm sure in 1, 2, 3 years, there'll be 100 more sources of data that we haven't even thought about. So having given a brief overview of all those things, I think it's worth drilling down into a couple of those, and we'll give you some applications of these kind of alternative data sources in credit risk. And I'll hand back over to Adam to talk about text analysis and how we can use text to inform our credit models.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Okay, so just going to talk a little bit about language processing to analyze text. So text data can be anything. It can be news data, social media data, it could be Twitter feeds, it could be, there's various news APIs, or any other kind of documents. And one of the things that we've been working on at Company Watch is using the kind of text or language from companies' reports, financial reports, to predict financial distress or insolvency. So here's just a pipeline of the kind of thing that you do in this kind of modeling process. So we collected, over the last 10 or 15 years, hundreds of thousands of companies' financial reports, which obviously contain the financial actual numbers, but they also contain all of the text, all the things that the auditors or the chairman of the company said about their company. And what we've done is we've gone and extracted the text, we've cleaned up that text, maybe picked out particular keywords or phrases, and then we've exposed this to an artificial intelligence machine learning model and effectively trained that model to figure out what the kind of signs of financial distress are, given the companies that we know have previously gone into some kind of insolvency event, and what their people said in their financial reports before that event. And then essentially once you've exposed that model to all of that data, then on a kind of single, going forward on a single report at a time level, you can work out what the likelihood of failure is of a particular company at that point in time from looking at the text. So here's some examples of some frequent words and phrases that we found are potentially negative in this modelling process. So things like default or loans or taxation, director resignation, things that you might expect. The model was able to work these things out organically. And here's some positive things that may marginally decrease the probability of financial distress. So some more positive things like dividend or some positive words, profit per share, that kind of thing. Okay, and just to kind of go into it in a little bit more depth, here is a graph and it shows 7 words and the average number of mentions in some financial reports in orange, where the company went on in the next 1 or 2 years to have some kind of distress or default event. And you can see and the blue is the companies that didn't have some kind of distress event. And you can see that in all these cases for these 7 words, the average number of mentions in the companies that went on to fail was higher for those companies in comparison. So we're not saying if there's a particularly one of these words in the financial report that company is necessarily going to fail, but we're just trying to allow the credit analyst or the person reading the reports to be directed to the right place in the report and to find things that the artificial intelligence model found to be of interest or of importance to the model. Okay, so we built this model based on these words and phrases that occur in these financial reports. And what we find is that we have already the H-score and the model of financial strength coming from the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement, the cash flow statement. And the model built on the words and the text is kind of adding extra new information. So the accuracy of the 2 combined approaches, using the more traditional data but also the alternative data, can add to the accuracy of your overall picture of a company and can provide extra value that you couldn't have found by just analysing the traditional data. Okay, so now I'll just go through a couple of recent examples that we've recently looked at using the new text-based modelling. So this is LK Bennett, a retailer, clothes company in the UK. And whilst the financial model in this case picked up that this was likely to be a problematic company from a credit point of view, the text-based model decided that there were particular indicators that it found in the text, and these were turnaround, restructuring, cash flow forecasts, exceptional costs. And here I've tried to highlight some information from the financial report before they went into administration in March. So they're talking about the wider challenges in the retail sector. They've got a turnaround strategy, and there's some exceptional costs that were driven by a corporate restructuring process that they were in. So again, it's all about kind of alerting the user of the system to the likely things that they would want to look at, and by using artificial intelligence, you can take away a lot of the work that is involved in reading a lot of these financial reports for many people. Another example, Crawshaw Butchers PLC, a butcher company, publicly listed, recently went into administration in November. In that financial report, before they went into administration, they were talking about the fact there was a new management team and there were issues and things that were disappointing and things like that. And one further example, a company in the US that recently went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, actually in July 2017, the model was able to pick out that they had this credit agreement. We found that the model that we built on the US companies, whenever a company had some kind of revolving credit facility or credit agreement, that was what the model was kind of alerting us to. Okay, so they're just a few examples of some of the things that we've been doing with text-based analysis using machine learning. So the message is really that together with traditional modeling based on financial data, you can put this together with unstructured text data, and the outcome from this kind of process will be likely give you better accuracy, and it will be a complementary approach to that original approach. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Phil to talk to you a little bit about network analysis and credit risk.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so I'm going to give another example of where we can use these sorts of alternative data. And this is slightly different, but again, similar sorts of themes. So what we're talking about here is network analysis. And by this, I mean using information about the directors and the relationships between companies to really interrogate and enhance credit scoring. So here we're going beyond looking at a company in isolation. We're looking at the corporate history of its directors and also the financial strength of any connected companies. And this concept of looking at the relationships and connections rather than just the individual data about the company is not necessarily new, and we're not necessarily using new information. We're just analyzing that information in a different way, and we're doing it on a different scale. And I'll come back to what I mean by that shortly. This is particularly valuable when we're thinking of companies that have quite limited traditional information or raw financial information, and I'll give some examples of why that might be shortly. So you might think that a director, for example, that's been involved in insolvency in the past might have a higher risk of being involved with failures in the future. So if a new company, Company D, was founded, of which Director 1 was a new director, this newly incorporated company might be a more risky proposition to extend credit to, because we know in the past Director 1 has been associated with this failed company, Company A. I've represented in red here. And again, that's particularly powerful when we have a newly incorporated company where we don't have any financial data yet. This effect might even extend through co-directors. So you can imagine a situation where a company that's actually a couple of stages removed from a failure. So here we have Company A that failed. A newly incorporated Company E is related indirectly to Company A, and there may be a higher chance of failure even in this case. So the protocol here for analysing the credit risk of a newly incorporated company might be to get the credit scores of all related companies based on the directors, build up a profile for each of those directors that might be involved with the new company, and then assess the risk based on that corporate history of each director, particularly any insolvencies or failures in the past, but it could be other data about the companies that are in the history of that director as well. Approaches like this really rely on the fact that we have accurate recording of the connections or the directorships details for companies, and I'll come back to that in a detail shortly. But it also relies very heavily on being able to analyze very large volumes of data and look at the connections across the whole population to be able to draw statistically relevant conclusions. And analyzing data at this kind of volume and this scale requires both new data analysis and handling techniques, and also innovative new algorithms and machine learning approaches. So this really is partly a problem of scale. We know that in the UK, Companies House reports officer information for each company, but it's not able, purely through bandwidth of human resource available, to extensively check and rationalize director profiles. The result of this is that there are many multiple directorship profiles for a given individual. And in order to process the data in this sort of network relationship fashion, we really need to deduplicate these records so that we have an idea of the same individual and give them link up multiple records. This is a fairly large undertaking. There are 16 million unique officers registered at Companies House. 9 million of those are related to the 4 million or so live companies. So you can see that the scale here is quite different to that of just traditional financial data, where we're only considering companies in isolation. Often, if we just look through the Companies House system, we may be able to see duplicates ourselves. So here is one of the founders of Company Watch. He has 2 profiles on Companies House, and that's simply because there's a misspelling in the name of the address of the company. While it might be easy to spot duplicates on a case-by-case basis, when there are 16 million unique officers to compare, a manual approach like this is just obviously not scalable. We'd have to carry out 256 trillion matching pairs to find duplicate directors. And so we have to use state-of-the-art data processing, big data processing, and machine learning techniques to find these potential duplicates, carry out this data validation and data cleansing, and really resolve this large number of profiles down into individuals. We've used this algorithm, an algorithm we've developed to get a matching confidence between all pairs of officers. And this gives us about 4.3 million matches with a confidence of 90% or higher. And given that there are 16 million officers, you can see that if a quarter of these are actually duplicated, this has a bigger impact on that network or connectivity analysis. So an example where this is relevant to credit risk is in the practice of phoenixing. Phoenixing is where unscrupulous directors use bankruptcy proceedings and bankruptcy process to avoid repaying their creditors, and then they strip the assets from a company and start trading again under a new name. This is unfortunately quite common in the UK, and it's very, very costly to creditors and lenders, but it's actually quite hard to detect and then prosecute for the authorities just because of the volume of companies they have to track. If we use our matching algorithm and connectivity in the director network, we can try and identify suspicious patterns of behavior and these duplicate director records. And this might help identify cases of phoenixism and therefore identify or flag up to our potential customers any high-risk credit applications they might receive. And just a really kind of simple example of that, we've got an article here from The Guardian from a couple of years ago about a conservatory company, IEO Home Improvements, based in Kent, and they went through this practice of phoenixing several times. The owner, Luke Tester, who's now been disbarred from directing companies, he was doing this process of stripping assets and starting again. And if we look at his directorship network in the raw Company House data, we can see Luke Tester in the middle here. He is connected to 4 companies, and one of these is the failed IEO Home Improvements that he declared bankrupt before moving on to another company. However, there are actually 5 Luke Testers registered at Companies House, and the matching algorithm I mentioned earlier has identified and picked up his 5 different profiles, and we see now there are additional companies that are connected to this failure, and it enhances our view of this suspicious business pattern that we might be able to see in the data. And in our new system that we've implemented, we can see this exact process happening. We've matched against these other Luke Testers, and we can pick up the fact that he's been disqualified, and also that there are several companies that weren't just connected to the single profile at Companies House. So that's just a very simple toy example of another application of alternative data and credit risk. So really the summary and the bottom line here is that we can use machine learning and AI to build pattern recognition algorithms that are far more performant than humans, purely because, or largely because of the volume of data that we can expose these systems to. this is very scalable. We can throw more and more data and more sorts of data, alternative data and traditional financial data, at these sorts of models. And if we collect enough of this data, then the AI models can become far more accurate than we could ever achieve as an individual human. So thank you very much for your time, and we'd like to take questions if there are any.
Yep, there are, Phil. We actually have a couple, I think. One was to Peter O'Reilly. Are you guys good to share this presentation? As ever, a great forum. So thank you very much for that, Peter. Yes, the slides will be available in the next couple of days on the website. There's also another one from, I think that's Matt Chapman. I think it's got Matt Chap up here. Does the AI allow you to highlight failed businesses at same addresses? Also, could you highlight if a large number of independent businesses use the same address, registered address?
Sure, I can answer that one. Yeah, so it's a good question, Matt. Thanks very much. Yeah, so the AI procedure we're taking here does highlight these sorts of things, and actually you find some very interesting and quite surprising patterns that come out when you do this kind of scaled analysis of the data. Certainly, you often find these patterns of failed businesses linked to a particular address, and also a large number of businesses may be registered at the same address. Now, this could correspond particularly to company formation companies, and that it can be, an indicator of potentially higher credit risk, but it may not be on its own, the final nail in the coffin. But it's just another piece of data that goes into these sorts of systems, and that means you can build up a broader array of metrics, be that the traditional financial score tied to some kind of text analysis and sentiment analysis, and then also maybe you're flagging up the fact that, hang on, this company is actually registered at a business address that's had several failures in the past. You get a much more holistic viewpoint of a company's financial health and thus credit risk, and yeah, it's certainly very, very valuable for that. I think there may be another question, Laurie. I think we've got a question from Eddie Younger. Does it define directors that may be the same name being a different person? So yeah, again, it's a difficult process to develop these robust algorithms to try and identify individuals from multiple profiles. Well, the name is one feature that we use here, but we also use other features related to the sorts of companies that they're related to and the patterns of business that they do, and also things like addresses and those. So it's using multiple different features to try and to predict how likely two profiles are to be the same person. Having the same name is a strong indicator that you're likely to be the same person or having a very similar name. But obviously it's not enough in itself, because John Smith could be hundreds of different people. So you have to take a number of different pieces of information in order to improve the accuracy of your model there.
I know Eddie, actually he's joining us from Dallas in Texas. So as also Peter O'Reilly said, fabulous, great job, guys. So thank you very much indeed, Peter. Just one final question I have here. Where do you see credit risk scoring in 5 years' time?
Shall I take this one, Phil?
It went very quiet there for a second.
I mean, essentially, there's lots of different data sources that will become available. So we briefly touched upon the government are opening up more on different data sets. So that's going to be one factor. there probably will be more data around that companies collect. As we said, I think there's more data now collected in the last 2 years than at any other point in human history. I think so. There will be lots more of data-driven modeling. The problem slightly with artificial intelligence is that it's quite difficult to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. It can quite often be a black box kind of modeling process. So there's quite a lot of work in the interpretability of artificial intelligence at the moment. And that's about trying to get human interpretation of what a particular machine learning algorithm is saying. So I think there'll be more on that front, especially in particular industries where there's a lot of compliance related issues. And I think so. More data, more interpretability, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it's also worth saying as well that that we're not here. This isn't kind of we're not prophets of doom here. We're not saying that that credit analysts are about to be replaced by your laptop. These sorts of machine learning models are very powerful, but one of the key purposes here isn't to replace credit analysts. It's to enhance what they're doing and really focus their attention. What these models are doing is, they're making, they may be able to make a lot of very easy decisions that might take up human time, and allow in freeing up credit analysts and accountants and others to do real deep dive work on problem cases or cases near the boundary where it's not so clear. So a lot of the value here is freeing up individuals and focusing individuals' attention on those cases that are surprising, unusual, and worthy of a kind of human's intuition. The machine isn't going to be able to replace that, but what it can do is free you up to do more of the interesting work by taking away a lot of that drudge work. So that's really a kind of uplifting thing for these sorts of alternative data sources.
Well, I don't think there's any more questions, so I'd like to just a big thank you to Dr. Adam and Dr. Philip, also to Company Watch for the webinar today. Also, thank you very much to everybody that joined us. I hope you found it interesting. As we said earlier, this is being recorded, and there will be a copy of it available in the next couple of days on the Forums International website and hopefully Company Watch's website. And we will, you'll watch out on social media, we'll too when it's ready. So hopefully we'll see you again at the next webinar in a few weeks' time. Please go on to Forums International for more details. Okay, thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.